My beloved child. Before you move on, before your finger swipes away from these words, before the noise of the world pulls your attention somewhere else, listen carefully. Something has been trying to reach you. Not through coincidence. Not through luck. Not through chance. Through moments you almost ignored. Through feelings you could not explain. Through nights when your heart felt strangely restless and you did not know why. Through dreams that faded when morning arrived. Through songs that appeared at the exact moment you needed them. Through memories that returned without invitation. You thought these things were random. They were not. You have been standing at the edge of a turning point, and even though your eyes could not fully see it, your soul has felt it for longer than you realize. There is a reason these words have found you now. There is a reason your attention stopped here. There is a reason your spirit feels as if something important is about to be revealed. Because it is. For a long time, you have carried a question inside yourself. Sometimes you whispered it. Sometimes you buried it. Sometimes you pretended you no longer cared. Yet it remained. Will I ever be chosen? Will someone truly see me? Will someone recognize the love I have kept hidden inside my heart? Will someone stay? You rarely spoke these questions aloud. But heaven heard every one of them. Every silent cry. Every private disappointment. Every moment you smiled in front of others while carrying loneliness that nobody noticed. I was there. When you convinced yourself you were fine. When you told everyone you had moved on. When you laughed while secretly wondering whether real love was something meant for everyone except you. I was there. And what I am about to tell you will challenge everything you thought was happening behind the scenes of your life. Because the waiting you experienced was never empty. The delays were not punishment. The silence was not abandonment. The closed doors were not rejection. What looked like nothing was actually preparation. Even now, as you hear these words, you are only seeing a small fraction of the story. There were conversations your eyes never witnessed. Movements your mind never understood. Paths crossing in places you never visited. Moments unfolding beyond your awareness. And at the center of those movements was a soul. A soul connected to a future you could not yet see. You believed your story was standing still. It was not. You believed nothing was changing. It was. You believed your deepest prayer had been placed on a forgotten shelf in heaven. But it was being carried carefully through seasons you did not understand. That is why certain people disappeared. That is why certain connections dissolved. That is why certain relationships could not continue. You mourned what left. But you never saw what was being protected. You never saw what was being preserved. You never saw what was being saved for the right moment. There were times when you begged for answers. Yet if every answer had arrived immediately, you would have run toward people who were never meant to remain. You would have attached yourself to situations that could not support your future. You would have mistaken temporary comfort for lasting destiny. So the truth remained hidden. Not forever. Just until your spirit was ready. And now something is changing. Can you feel it? Look honestly at the last several weeks. The last several months. Something has been shifting beneath the surface. Perhaps you cannot explain it. Perhaps you have tried. But words keep falling short. Because this shift is deeper than circumstances. Deeper than appearances. Deeper than logic. It is happening first within your spirit. A chapter that held you for longer than expected is beginning to loosen its grip. Old pain no longer feels as powerful as it once did. Old disappointments no longer define you the same way. Old wounds that once controlled your thoughts are slowly losing authority. This is not accidental. It is a sign. A signal. A whisper before a revelation. Because the version of you that was carrying certain burdens cannot walk into what is coming next. Something had to be released. Something had to be healed. Something had to be transformed. You thought you were merely surviving difficult seasons. But beneath those seasons, your soul was evolving. Every tear taught you something. Every heartbreak reshaped something. Every disappointment uncovered something. And now, standing where you are today, you possess a depth that did not exist before. You carry wisdom that pain could not destroy. You carry compassion that bitterness could not erase. You carry strength that suffering could not steal. That strength matters more than you know. Because the connection approaching your life is not built on fantasy. It is not built on illusion. It is not built on temporary excitement. It is built on something far deeper. Something far rarer. Something capable of surviving storms. But before you understand the connection, you must understand the journey. There was a period when your heart nearly gave up. You remember it. Even if nobody else does. There was a night when disappointment sat beside you like a shadow. A night when hope felt exhausting. A night when believing became difficult. You stared into the future and saw uncertainty. You wondered whether all your effort had been meaningless. You wondered whether your prayers were disappearing into silence. You wondered whether love was becoming a story you would only watch happen for others. That night mattered. More than you realize. Because something happened during that darkness. Not outside you. Inside you. A hidden decision was made. A sacred choice. You decided that even if nobody understood your value, you would keep moving forward. Even if nobody recognized your heart, you would keep becoming the person you were meant to be. Even if nobody chose you, you would continue growing. That decision echoed farther than you know. Because true transformation rarely begins during moments of celebration. It begins during moments of surrender. And that surrender changed the direction of your path. The moment you stopped chasing validation, something extraordinary began unfolding. The moment you stopped forcing doors, new pathways quietly started forming. The moment you released desperation, alignment began. Not instantly. Not dramatically. But steadily. Silently. Powerfully. You could not see it then. Yet pieces were moving. Events were arranging themselves. Timelines were shifting. And somewhere beyond your awareness, another heart was traveling through its own preparation. Another soul was experiencing lessons. Another spirit was confronting fears. Another life was being shaped by experiences that seemed unrelated at the time. Just as you were learning. Just as you were healing. Just as you were growing. So were they. You have imagined this person before. Not their face. Not their voice. Not their exact identity. But their presence. You imagined what it would feel like to finally exhale. To finally stop wondering. To finally feel understood without constant explanation. To finally experience peace where there had only been uncertainty. You imagined being seen. Not for your appearance. Not for your achievements. Not for what you could provide. But for who you truly are. And every time you imagined that feeling, your soul was remembering something your mind had not yet learned. Because there are encounters that seem ordinary when they begin. A glance. A conversation. A message. A moment. And yet beneath the surface, entire destinies are shifting. The most powerful chapters rarely announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they arrive disguised as ordinary moments. That is why you must remain attentive. Because what is approaching may not look the way you expected. It may not arrive according to your timeline. It may not appear wrapped in the packaging your imagination created. But when it arrives, something inside you will recognize it. Not immediately. Not all at once. But gradually. Like remembering a song you have not heard in years. Like seeing the sunrise after a long night. Like discovering that what felt lost was quietly finding its way toward you the entire time. Yet there is something else you must understand. Something few people realize. The greatest obstacle standing between souls is rarely distance. It is fear. Fear has delayed countless blessings. Fear has silenced countless opportunities. Fear has convinced countless hearts to remain hidden. And fear has been fighting fiercely around your story. Not because you are weak. But because what is approaching carries significance. The closer people move toward meaningful breakthroughs, the louder fear becomes. Have you noticed that? Just when something important is near, doubts appear. Questions emerge. Old insecurities return. Unexpected uncertainties rise from nowhere. That is not coincidence. It is resistance. The final shadows attempting to convince you that nothing is changing. The final whispers attempting to persuade you to close your heart. The final barriers attempting to stop what has already begun. But they are losing power. Little by little. Day by day. Moment by moment. Their influence is weakening. Because truth is stronger than fear. And the truth is this. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked. You are not standing outside the story. You are standing inside a chapter whose significance has not yet been fully revealed. The signs have already started. Small signs. Subtle signs. The kind many people dismiss. Unexpected feelings. Repeated symbols. Moments of unusual clarity. Intuitive nudges. Strange timing. Meaningful encounters. Pieces that seem disconnected until suddenly they form a complete picture. Watch carefully. Pay attention. Because the picture is still forming. And the next piece is closer than you think. In fact, if you could see everything from heaven's perspective, your heart would race. You would understand why certain delays happened. You would understand why certain people left. You would understand why certain opportunities vanished. You would understand why certain prayers appeared unanswered. Because what seemed like endings were often redirections. What seemed like losses were often protections. What seemed like silence was often preparation. And now, after everything you have endured, after every lesson, every disappointment, every unexpected turn, a threshold stands before you. Most people would walk past it without noticing. But not you. Because your soul has been prepared to recognize it. The threshold is not merely about romance. It is not merely about companionship. It is not merely about being chosen. It is about becoming fully available for the life that has been waiting beyond your fears. That is why this moment matters. That is why your attention was drawn here. That is why your spirit feels stirred. Because a revelation is approaching. A revelation connected to timing. Connected to alignment. Connected to a choice that has not yet been made. And here is the mystery that few understand. The next chapter does not depend solely on you. Another heart stands at a crossroads. Another soul faces a decision. Another life is approaching a moment that will influence your story in ways neither of you fully understand. Even now, they feel something shifting. Even now, they sense change approaching. Even now, they are questioning things they once ignored. They do not yet see the entire picture. Neither do you. But the movement has begun. And what happens next will determine far more than either of you realize. Because soon, very soon, a moment will arrive. A moment that appears small on the surface. So small that many would overlook it. Yet hidden inside that moment will be a choice. A choice carrying consequences neither of you can yet imagine. A choice capable of opening a door that has remained closed for longer than expected. A choice connected directly to the prayer you thought heaven had forgotten. And when that moment appears, everything will depend on whether the signs are recognized in time. Because there is something I have not revealed yet. Something about this soul. Something about the journey that brought them here. Something about what they have been experiencing while you believed you were walking alone. And when you discover that truth, the entire story will look different. But that revelation cannot be given yet. Not until you understand what happened during the season neither of you knew the other existed. Not until you see the hidden thread connecting both journeys. Not until you learn why the waiting had to last exactly as long as it did. For the answer is closer than you think. And the next piece of the mystery changes everything. The next piece of the mystery changes everything because the waiting was never happening on only one side of the story. While you were questioning the delays, another journey was unfolding in silence. While you were asking why certain doors remained closed, another heart was standing before doors that could not yet be opened. While you were wondering whether your future was moving forward, another soul was being led through lessons that seemed unrelated, painful, and at times completely unfair. Neither of you could see each other. Neither of you knew the details. Yet heaven was working with both stories at once. This is what makes the hidden parts of destiny so difficult to understand. People assume preparation only happens to the one who is waiting. But true alignment requires both paths to evolve. Both hearts must learn. Both spirits must grow. Both lives must arrive at the appointed moment carrying the wisdom necessary to protect what is coming. If one arrives too early, confusion takes over. If one arrives too late, opportunity slips away. And so the unseen work continued. Month after month. Season after season. Quietly. Patiently. Without announcing itself. There were moments when this person believed they had already missed their chance at happiness. Moments when they questioned their own worth. Moments when they carried disappointments that looked remarkably similar to yours. Different details. Different circumstances. Yet strangely familiar wounds. You were not the only one learning how to heal. You were not the only one learning how to trust again. You were not the only one learning how to release what could not remain. And that realization alone carries a truth many people never discover. The connection approaching your life is not between a perfect person and a wounded person. It is between two souls who survived seasons that were meant to break them. Two people who learned difficult lessons separately. Two hearts that were refined through experiences they never would have chosen for themselves. That is why what is approaching feels different. It is not built on fantasy. It is not built on unrealistic expectations. It is not built on the illusion that life will suddenly become effortless. It is built on understanding. The kind of understanding that can only be born through experience. The kind of understanding that recognizes pain without being controlled by it. The kind of understanding that knows how precious genuine connection truly is. Yet there is something even more remarkable. Something that remained hidden until now. Several times your paths almost crossed. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Almost literally. Moments existed when a slightly different decision could have altered the timeline. A different conversation. A different invitation. A different route. A different day. A different choice. And the encounter could have happened much sooner. You may find that difficult to believe. But some of the greatest turning points in life exist within inches of visibility. A person sits across a room. A name appears and disappears. An opportunity presents itself briefly and vanishes. What appears insignificant later reveals itself as deeply meaningful. Yet those moments were not mistakes. Those near encounters were not failures. They were reminders. Proof that the story was already moving. Proof that the distance between your lives was shrinking. Proof that the timing was drawing closer. Closer than either of you realized. That is why certain feelings began appearing recently. A restlessness that does not behave like anxiety. A hope that refuses to disappear. A strange sense that something important is approaching. You tried to explain it logically. You searched for reasons. You attempted to dismiss it. Yet it kept returning. Because your spirit often recognizes movement before your circumstances reveal it. The soul notices shifts long before the eyes do. And the shift has already begun. There is a reason old chapters suddenly feel heavier than before. There is a reason certain connections no longer satisfy your spirit. There is a reason familiar patterns feel increasingly uncomfortable. You are outgrowing environments that once felt permanent. The life you are stepping toward requires a different version of you. A version that trusts more deeply. A version that no longer negotiates away its value. A version that understands what it deserves. This transformation is essential. Because when the moment arrives, uncertainty will attempt one final attack. Doubt will whisper. Fear will question. Past disappointments will try to convince you that history is repeating itself. And that is where many people lose the blessing they prayed for. Not because the blessing failed to arrive, but because fear convinced them to misidentify it. That is why awareness matters. That is why discernment matters. That is why your recent growth matters. You are being prepared to recognize something others might overlook. But the most surprising revelation is still ahead. For a long time you believed the story was about finding someone. The deeper truth is that the story has always been about becoming someone. The person you are now could not have existed without the waiting. Without the unanswered questions. Without the uncertainty. Without the lessons. The waiting transformed you. And because it transformed you, the future now has room to unfold differently. Think carefully. If every prayer had been answered exactly when you first requested it, would you have become who you are today? Would your wisdom be the same? Would your strength be the same? Would your understanding of love be the same? Probably not. What once felt like delay was often development. What once felt like denial was often protection. What once felt like abandonment was often redirection. The realization of this truth changes everything. Because it means the story was never against you. It was preparing you. Every difficult chapter carried hidden purpose. Every disappointment concealed hidden instruction. Every closed door contained hidden mercy. And now those hidden pieces are beginning to reveal themselves. One by one. Layer by layer. Like the first rays of sunlight touching a horizon after an impossibly long night. Yet there remains one final secret. A secret connected to choice. The future is moving toward you. But destiny does not remove free will. This is important. Very important. Because the soul approaching your life also stands before a decision. A meaningful decision. A life-altering decision. A decision they cannot postpone forever. They have reached a season where remaining unchanged is becoming impossible. The comfort of old patterns is fading. The safety of hesitation is disappearing. The familiar excuses no longer carry the same power. Something is calling them forward. Something is asking them to become courageous. And the outcome of that choice will create ripples neither of you can yet fully see. That is why heaven has been so patient. That is why preparation has been so thorough. That is why timing has been so precise. The next chapter is not arriving by accident. It is arriving through alignment. And alignment is far more delicate than most people understand. One decision can alter years. One moment can redirect futures. One act of courage can unlock doors that appeared permanently sealed. Which brings us to the revelation that has been waiting behind every word you have heard. The soulmate you have been praying for. The person connected to this chapter. The soul whose path has been drawing closer and closer to yours. Is no longer standing at the beginning of their journey. They are approaching the moment of recognition. Approaching the moment of choice. Approaching the moment when hesitation can no longer remain in control. The waiting is nearing its end. Not because time simply passed. But because preparation is reaching completion. And when preparation reaches completion, movement follows. That movement has already started. The first signs are already unfolding. The first pieces are already falling into place. The first doors are already beginning to unlock. But there is one thing I have still not revealed. One truth that changes the meaning of everything you thought this message was about. Because the greatest surprise is not who this soulmate is. It is how they will recognize you. The answer is connected to something from your past. Something you considered insignificant. Something you almost forgot. Something that appears unrelated to love altogether. Yet it is the very thread heaven has been using to weave both stories together. And when that hidden connection is finally revealed, when you discover how long the unseen preparation has actually been happening, when you learn why certain events unfolded exactly the way they did, you will understand that this was never merely a love story. It was a divine appointment unfolding across years. An appointment that is now closer than ever before. Closer than yesterday. Closer than last month. Closer than the moment you began listening. And what happens next will reveal the secret behind the sign that has been following you all along. And what happens next will reveal the secret behind the sign that has been following you all along. Not the sign you expected. Not the dramatic miracle you imagined. Not a message written across the sky. The sign has been far quieter than that. So quiet, in fact, that you almost overlooked it. Yet it has appeared again and again throughout your journey. Disguised as ordinary moments. Hidden inside everyday experiences. Waiting patiently for the day when all the pieces would finally make sense. The strange thing about divine patterns is that they rarely announce themselves while they are happening. People recognize them afterward. When the puzzle is complete. When the picture becomes visible. When scattered events suddenly reveal that they were never scattered at all. You are approaching that realization now. And when it arrives, many of the questions that once haunted you will begin finding their answers. Questions about timing. Questions about loss. Questions about delays. Questions about people who entered your life only to leave. Questions about opportunities that disappeared before they could fully develop. The answers are closer than you think. Because there is a thread connecting all of them. A thread that has remained hidden until this moment. Think about the times you felt redirected. The times plans collapsed unexpectedly. The times your heart wanted one thing while life delivered something entirely different. At the time, those moments felt frustrating. Some felt painful. Some felt deeply unfair. Yet if those events had unfolded according to your original expectations, the path before you today would not exist. You would not be standing where you are now. You would not be becoming who you are now. And perhaps most importantly, you would not be approaching the chapter that is beginning to emerge. This is where many people misunderstand destiny. They imagine it as a straight road. A simple line. A direct journey from one blessing to another. But destiny often looks like detours while it is unfolding. It looks like confusion. It looks like uncertainty. It looks like unanswered questions. Only later does the pattern become visible. Only later does the wisdom reveal itself. Only later does the soul understand why certain turns were necessary. You are nearing one of those moments of understanding. A moment when several mysteries begin connecting. A moment when scattered experiences suddenly appear linked together. A moment when you realize that what felt random was anything but random. Because the unseen preparation extended much farther back than you realize. Long before you started praying for this chapter. Long before you began wondering about your future. Long before you recognized how deeply you desired genuine connection. Seeds were already being planted. Experiences were already shaping you. Lessons were already preparing your spirit. And while that was happening, another story was unfolding elsewhere. Another life was receiving its own lessons, its own challenges, its own redirections, its own moments of growth. The remarkable truth is that neither journey made complete sense on its own. Only together do they reveal the larger picture. Only together do they explain why certain events had to happen. Only together do they reveal why the waiting lasted exactly as long as it did. And this realization carries enormous power. Because once you see the pattern, fear begins losing its influence. Fear survives through uncertainty. Fear survives through incomplete information. Fear survives by convincing people that their story has no purpose. But purpose destroys fear. Meaning weakens doubt. Understanding creates peace. And understanding is approaching. Closer with every passing day. Yet before that understanding arrives, something unexpected must happen. Something that may initially appear small. A conversation. An encounter. An opportunity. A decision. On the surface it may seem ordinary. Many people would dismiss it immediately. Many would fail to recognize its significance. But your spirit is being prepared to notice it. Because the next chapter will not begin with fireworks. It will begin with recognition. A subtle recognition. A quiet awareness. An undeniable feeling that something important has entered the story. This feeling cannot be manufactured. It cannot be forced. It cannot be imitated. When it arrives, part of you will know. Not because every question is answered. Not because every detail becomes clear. But because something deeper responds. Something beneath logic. Something beneath fear. Something beneath appearances. The soul recognizes what the mind is still trying to understand. That recognition changes everything. Yet there is still another layer hidden beneath the surface. Another revelation waiting behind the curtain. Because the approaching connection is not merely about receiving love. It is about receiving confirmation. Confirmation that your heart was not foolish for believing. Confirmation that your patience was not wasted. Confirmation that your hope survived for a reason. For years, circumstances attempted to teach you a dangerous lesson. The lesson that expectations lead only to disappointment. The lesson that vulnerability is weakness. The lesson that protecting your heart means closing it completely. But your soul resisted. Even when exhausted. Even when discouraged. Even when uncertain. Something inside you continued believing there was more. Continued believing that your story was not finished. Continued believing that one day the pieces would fit together. That belief matters more than you know. Because belief kept the door open. Belief preserved possibility. Belief protected the future from being abandoned before it arrived. And now that future is drawing nearer. Nearer than it has ever been before. The energy surrounding your life is changing. The atmosphere around your journey is shifting. Doors that once felt immovable are becoming less rigid. Paths that once seemed impossible are becoming visible. Opportunities that once appeared distant are moving closer. This movement may not yet be obvious to your eyes. But your spirit has already begun sensing it. That is why certain dreams feel different. That is why certain intuitions feel stronger. That is why certain moments carry unusual emotional weight. You are standing near the edge of transition. Near the edge of revelation. Near the edge of a chapter that has been approaching for much longer than you realize. And still, one question remains. Why now? Why after all this time? Why after all these delays? Why after all these lessons? The answer is both simple and profound. Because readiness has finally begun replacing resistance. Not perfection. Readiness. There is a difference. You do not need to become flawless. You do not need to have every wound completely erased. You do not need to possess every answer. You only need to be willing to step forward when the moment arrives. Willing to trust. Willing to recognize. Willing to receive. That willingness creates possibilities that fear cannot understand. And somewhere, beyond your current awareness, another soul is approaching the same realization. Another heart is becoming willing. Another spirit is becoming ready. The distance between both journeys is shrinking. The timing is narrowing. The alignment is strengthening. This is why the atmosphere around your story feels different. Because something is accelerating. Not chaotically. Not recklessly. But intentionally. Like the final moments before dawn when the darkness appears unchanged even though sunrise is only minutes away. Many people give up during those final moments. They mistake the last stretch of night for permanent darkness. They assume nothing is changing because they cannot yet see the horizon. But the horizon is already changing. The light is already approaching. The transformation is already underway. And your story is entering that exact phase. The phase where invisible movement begins producing visible results. The phase where hidden preparation begins creating tangible outcomes. The phase where years of unseen work begin revealing their purpose. Yet there remains one final mystery. One final piece that cannot be ignored. A choice that belongs entirely to you. Because when the sign finally becomes clear, when the connection begins revealing itself, when the opportunity appears before you, will you recognize it? Will you trust what your spirit is telling you? Or will old fears attempt to rewrite the future? This question matters. Because fear rarely disappears completely before breakthrough arrives. Fear often waits until the very edge of fulfillment. Then it whispers old stories. Stories about rejection. Stories about disappointment. Stories about failure. Stories about why you should remain where it feels safe. But safety and destiny are not always the same thing. Comfort and growth are not always the same thing. Protection and avoidance are not always the same thing. And the next chapter will require courage. Not reckless courage. Not blind courage. But the courage to believe that what is arriving is different from what came before. The courage to stop judging the future by the pain of the past. The courage to allow a new story to unfold. Because the truth is this. The soulmate connected to your journey is not arriving to repeat old wounds. They are arriving after their own transformation. After their own lessons. After their own awakening. And what joins both stories together is not coincidence. It is preparation. Years of preparation. Layers of preparation. Hidden preparation that neither of you fully understood while it was happening. Soon, evidence of that preparation will become impossible to ignore. Soon, the signs will become stronger. Soon, the pieces will begin connecting faster than before. Soon, a revelation will emerge that explains why your heart kept feeling that something important was approaching. And when that revelation arrives, one detail from your past will suddenly take on a completely different meaning. A detail you never considered significant. A memory you barely think about anymore. A moment that seemed ordinary. Yet that moment is the key. The key that unlocks the mystery. The key that explains the waiting. The key that reveals how both journeys have been connected for far longer than you imagined. And when that key is finally turned, when the hidden truth begins unfolding, you will discover something so unexpected that it will force you to look at your entire life through a new lens. Because the person approaching your destiny has been carrying a piece of the same story. Without knowing it. Without seeing it. Without realizing how close the connection truly was. And the moment both pieces finally come together. The moment both stories finally recognize each other. Nothing will ever look the same again.